Hello, my name is Dr. Gregory Seltz. I'm the Executive Director of the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty here in Washington, D.C. And this is our Liberty Alert for November 18th. Just to let you know, we are taping this because we're having a conversation before that date. So if something does happen after we record this, I'll try to have some updates in my invitation, my live invitation for you on Wednesday. But I think we can start talking about some things even now. Where are we now in this election process? Where are we now in terms of the kinds of concerns that we had pre-election? Are those concerns justified? And we're going to be talking to Tim Goeglein, a friend of our ministry here in DC from Focus on the Family. We'll get to him in just a minute. But I wanted to say to all of you again, thank you so much for keeping us in your thoughts and prayers. Thank you so much for those who've been donating to us, because your gifts are what keep us here in DC. And again, just share our website with anyone and everyone you can. You can go to lcrlfreedom.org, and there's all kinds of resources there for you. So, you know, we've got a lot to talk about, even though things are still kind of in flux, and of course it is crazy out there. But I want to jump over to our guest today and just say, Tim, first of all, welcome. It's great to have you with us today.
Thank you. It's nice to be back, even in this incredibly uneven atmosphere.
It is incredibly uneven, and I guess that's what I want to talk about first. The first thing I want to say is, what is it like out there? Because a lot of people have never experienced an election like this, and I think COVID had a lot to do with it. Changing the voting laws had a lot to do with it. And I wasn't really in agreement with those things, but of course, you know, we don't have control over those things. But where are we, and why do you think we're here? And so what's it like really out there?
Well, first, I might take just one step back, not from nostalgia or sentiment, Greg, but just for grounding. Because exactly 20 years ago, I was spending 32 of the 36 days of Bush against Gore in Florida.
Right.
Across that time, I was working for the Bush campaign and found myself in 9 cities across those 30 plus days. And I remember very vividly when the United States Supreme Court determined and confirmed that George W. Bush, in fact, was the president. And I remember heading to the airport, after that more than month in the Sunshine State. And one of the very last conversations I had with a campaign colleague, he said to me as I was leaving, he said, well, it's been really tough and stressful, but at least we'll never have to go through anything like this again. That conversation has been ringing in my ears these last few days since Election Day. Sure. You know, in Bush v. Gore, as we all know, everybody and the nation, the world, was riveted like a laser beam on hanging chads and contentious counties and balloting. But that was just one state. And
Right.
That whole thing, as we all know, Greg, was a rather Herculean effort and, as they say, one for the ages in American presidential history. But what we are facing in 2020 is a confirmation of your and my last conversation, which that 2020, like 1968, continues to be one of the hinge years of American history. Because to take the idea of Bush against Gore in Florida and just one state, and to magnify and to multiply that across up to 6, 7, 8 states, we're talking about potential ballot recounts. We are talking about multiple lawsuits. I mean, this is really a Katie bar the door moment for our constitutional republic, and to the polarization and the toxic differences that so many Americans seem to have with oftentimes people living just next door.
Well, and you know, my concern, and I agree with you that there are reflections of this already back with Bush and Gore in 2000. But again, you know, when you start to hear the differences between the Chads and the like, you know, I've always been a person who's, when it comes to just the voting, how to vote, you show your license, you go sign the thing, they make sure that you're the right person, you get your ballot, and then you go do it. Well, we just data dumped millions. We just sent people out, ballots willy-nilly, and we expected somehow that there was going to be no fraud, there was going to be no problem with doing this. We did it 4 weeks early. I mean, we put into the system so many variables, and you would think with all the technology, all the abilities that we have today, we would have less variables in legal voting today than we would have had in Bush and Gore. And it just seems like we opened Pandora's box for no reason. And that's the thing that I struggle with.
We live in a large, complex, continental nation of 325 million plus souls. We live across multiple time zones, and we are, as a constitutional republic, conformed and built from the first days of our founding on a view that Washington does not impose a one-size-fits-all viewpoint on all 50 states.
Right.
And so what we have is, in some states, we have incredibly strict laws about in-person voting. We have strict laws about who receives a mail ballot, and how is the voter affirmed, confirmed, how is that, is the legality measured, etc. We have other parts of America which historically, have been less than ethical. And in fact, for years and years, I know you're a Midwesterner by birth, and so am I. There used to be, a phrase, about the corruption of Chicago: vote early and vote often.
Right.
And frankly, I think that, and I want to be very direct in answering you. I think, Greg, that one of the biggest problems, apart from balloting and apart from, political differences, but I think that one of the fundamental differences is that many millions of Americans have lost faith in American institutions. There was a time, and it really is not nostalgic, and it's not from the kind of mists of sentimentality, but there was a time not long ago when Americans overwhelmingly trusted the institutions within the country. And it's not that there's no trust. I don't think that. I'm not a cynic or a skeptic, but I think that hand in hand with what we have seen this year, if you build upon this underlying increasing distrust of institutions, you also end up with an election that feels very different from almost any other presidential election of our lifetime, including Bush v. Gore.
Well, that's kind of where we're at. There's no doubt about that. And we've been, even last week when we talked about this on this program, we talked about, we want to be able to make sure, to the best knowledge that we have, that that the legal votes of citizens are counted for the sake of their representation, because that's, our republic depends on that. And It would just seem to me that we should be able to hold these people accountable, no matter what each state does. And I know states are a lot different, and that's our confederated republic view. I get that, but they should be, whatever the rules that they are espousing, we should be honoring that, the legal citizen who votes, and that vote gets counted, and the illegal votes do not get counted. And I mean, they should be able to demonstrate that. And we did bring in, we added a lot more variables into the system. And so that's what we're dealing with. And thank God we have the courts, and we're going to get this thing straightened out. And let's just make sure we can trust the process. But here's the second question.
Please.
We already know now, Biden has already said that he's the president-elect, even though he promised he would wait till the audited votes were in. But we already know kind of what he's planning on doing. And we've been trying to say to people that religious liberty was on the ballot, and that if the Republicans were to lose all the branches of government, that there could be some real huge changes and some real challenges to traditional Christian churches, schools, preschools, universities, and they would not be good challenges. It would almost be that we could be pushed out of the public square. And I think we can honestly say, even now, even though he's not officially the president-elect yet, we're already seeing some of that kind of stuff happen. What are some of the things that you are seeing out there where we're already starting to say, yeah, that religious liberty stuff was very important, and we probably underestimated it even as much as we talked about it? What do you think?
Well, I am really pleased to get that question, because one of the things that I have preoccupied myself with at Focus on the Family, Greg, since the election, and for both potential administrations, a second Trump administration or a first Biden administration, I have focused like a laser beam on possible personnel. You know, in
Right.
Washington, D.C., we all vote for a president and a vice president. But here in Washington, along with any president or vice president, are thousands and thousands and thousands of people who are hired to implement the policy decisions. In other words, in Washington, policy is affirmed by personnel. Personnel is policy.
Right.
And one of the things that is absolutely definitive is that in some of the early telegraphing of who Vice President Biden may choose to inform and to counsel him on some of the most important healthcare, religious liberty, potential matters, and human life, are people who do not share our worldview, to say the least.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to give one concrete example, if I may. The vice president has already gathered around him a rather small circle of healthcare and medical providers for COVID. And I was reading through that list and looking specifically at those names just in the last 24 hours. And it did not surprise me, but it should be of great concern to all of us that the essential policy godfather of Obamacare was one of the very first people chosen. This is the brother of the former Chicago mayor. And the reason, Greg, that I am paying attention to this name among other names is that within the original Obamacare proposal, there was, of course, a huge swath of anti-human life mandates. We talked about last time the impact that this has had on just one group of American nuns. But I want to really stress this very strongly. This possibility of people of this nature, you know, fellow Americans, I'm not impugning their integrity at all, but their worldview, their policy views are in opposition to our views on human life. And when you look at a track record of legislation of the gargantuan size of Obamacare, this is potentially a deeply concerning development. And of course, this is not unrelated to things like the Hyde Amendment, which has historically prevented taxpayer funding of abortion. Well, under a potential new administration, policy-wise and personnel-wise, we will probably see a completely different view.
Well, and you know, he's already stated these things, and even talked about the executive orders that he will implement, you know, with a flurry, and all of these. I always am amazed. You know, we kept hearing about how the Trump administration was fascist and it was taking away our liberties. But if you actually look at what it did, he actually deregulated. You know, he protected churches, schools. He actually empowered small businesses, gave them great opportunities to succeed. And then you look at some of this agenda and you look at it, and it basically is saying to those of us who disagree with some of these policies, it's not just that you are going to disagree. We're not going to let you have this voice in the public square. And I'm deeply concerned about the pro-life stuff, obviously, like you just talked about, but also the religious liberty stuff. And you know, when we keep hearing how we got to come together and we're going to govern as one, my first thing was, okay, if President Biden is our president, then renounce the Equality Act, which is basically the Christian, you know, we're going to persecute the Christian, traditional Christian Church Act into oblivion. Apologize for that and say you're not going to do that, because it's definitely putting us in the crosshairs. And I think that's the kind of stuff we're already seeing, an aggressiveness to saying we're going to implement exactly what we told you we were, and you either get on board or you don't.
Yeah,
Um, I,
I'd like to build on what you just said, if I may. And I know that we're taping this earlier, and so I want to be, mindful of when people are actually viewing this. But yeah, to continue the very strange nature of 2020 and building into 2021, all roads now in the United States Senate run through the state of Georgia. You
right,
could hardly make this up, Greg, but we are going to have not one, but two special elections on Georgia in Georgia on the same day, on the 5th of January. And depending on how those elections go, if we do not have a pro-life Senate, if we do not have a pro-religious liberty Senate, regardless of party, this is essentially the only major firewall, which is to say, a pro-life, pro-religious liberty Senate to stop many of the things potentially that you're talking about. We saw a gain in the House of Representatives of up to 15 pro-life women. I mean,
right.
that is absolutely extraordinary.
When
And
they were supposed to lose.
yes, exactly. And it's possible that this will be the smallest majority for the majority party in the House of Representatives in many, many years.
Right.
But it is the U.S. Senate, as we know, for confirmations of potential nominees, of final decisions in the subcommittee, committee, and final floor votes. I can't overstate how absolutely central and important the United States Senate is for either a portal forward or a wall to some of the anti-human life and anti-religious liberty policies that are possible. And I want to mention just one thing very briefly, Greg, and that is Donald Trump's most important domestic legacy. His most important domestic legacy
Yeah.
is the fundamental way that he has reshaped the American judiciary.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are over 200 brand new federal judges there, including 3 Supreme Court justices. You and I tracked very closely the Philadelphia versus Fulton hearing in the Supreme Court just in the last 10 days. I mean, it is quite possible, Greg, that the new Justice, Amy Coney Barrett, could be writing a majority opinion taking a pro-religious liberty stance on orphan care, foster care, and adoption. This is a direct result of having a majority in the Senate, that shares an originalist interpretation of the Constitution. So the Senate is absolutely imperative on these questions of policy and personnel.
And you see, and again, sometimes we're in DC, and I hear people talking about these things, and you get down into the minutia. We're talking about fundamental things, especially our work here. We don't get bogged down in this. We're talking about, can the church be a public voice? Can it not be a public voice? And it really, it still kind of alarms me that the church thinks, oh, well, this is really not something to worry about. They're very much in the crosshairs, and there are people who would love to make sure that the church has no voice in our culture, in our politics, or whatever. And we've been trying to tell people, we've been trying to warn them about this. We've been trying to say why this is. I really even believe that there's moderate Democrats out there that are like, we don't want to shut the church down. I mean, there's pro-life Democrats. They don't want to shut the church down, but the politics of where we are is that one platform is all devoted to that. And I guess this is just opinion again, but why is it that we can't seem to get our people to understand how important this is? Because this is like vote against your own self-interest. Vote this way and they shut you down. Why would you do that? And I guess I don't fully understand why. I had people telling me, and this is why I voted this way. And I thought, wow, but you love your church.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm glad you raised this point because 3 days ago, a very good friend of mine in the pro-life community asked me if I had read one of the major policy speeches that Vice President Biden had given in Miami-Dade, Florida.
No.
And I was unaware of it. And like a lot of my fellow Lutherans, life is busy and you want to pay attention, to the important policy or personnel developments, but there is so much that you often miss things. And I'm very glad that my friend had told me about this, because I read the transcript of that particular Biden speech. And in this speech, Greg, he says that if at some point the Supreme Court were to overturn Roe versus Wade, this is the 1973 landmark case that mandated, abortion in all 50 states up to and including the 9th month of a pregnancy. And in this speech, Vice President Biden says, in fact, that we ought to think seriously about getting around the Supreme Court, that we ought to think about a legislative remedy. And in this speech in Miami, Florida, he says that he would strongly support legislation to codify, to concretize the Roe decision, which has resulted in 63 million abortions in America since 1973. He says that he would strongly support codifying Roe against Wade into legislation. Now that takes a person's breath away, that we're going to usurp the United States Constitution and the will of the people, and we are essentially going to put into lasting law what heretofore the courts have decided. This is very deep water, and this is beyond someone's opinion of this party or that party, this person or that party. This is where we as pro-life Lutheran Christians have to look at what possible policies could flow from any given administration, and to be serious about the massive implications for what something like that could actually be.
Well, and on top of that, I think where I've struggled with it, I think this is where some of this might lie, is that they're doing these they're heinous things, unconstitutional things, and yet they're the ones that are accusing other folks of doing these things. And they're using a lot of our terminology to do it. And I just was reading a book called Live Not by Lies by Robert Dreher, who wrote the Benedictine option. And
it's a fabulous book. I'm so glad you mentioned it.
And one of the things he talks about there is what's different between the fascists and the secularists of other regimes. They came in with power, and you immediately knew who they were, who you were. What's happening in America is they're taking over our language. They're using our language, using Christian language, but in a post-Christian, secularist way, statist way. And like you just said, they're talking about, being benevolent and kind while they're talking about letting babies die on the operating table after they're born alive in the 9th month. And you're sitting there going, that sounds almost Nazistic when you start to think about what people were willing to do to humanity in the Holocaust and in some of the chambers of power in Mao's place and Stalin's place. But here we're actually voting it into law, and we're actually talking about it like we're the nice and kind people in the culture. So they're taking over that language, but behind the scenes, it's exactly the opposite of what that language implies.
George Orwell, who was not a Christian, but who had felt and witnessed the true blunt of totalitarianism, wrote a very serious essay in which he said, to your point, Greg, he who controls language controls politics. Right. Words matter. And I think we are in an era now where we are having a very serious national debate beyond particular policies and far beyond politics. We are now having a very serious debate about the very nature of reality. What is reality and what is truth? Right. We are taught, for instance, in our beautiful faith, that there are male and female. But in many quadrants in the United States, if you were to simply and civilly and diplomatically and graciously assert that God made male and female, these are considered a form of fighting words. Right. That they're considered to be unacceptable in the public square. Right. So the whole idea of the ongoing discussion, and this is where I'm going, if I may, the ongoing discussion in the Biden-Harris circles about what is called constitutional reform should sober us very deeply, because there are millions of us who love and revere the Constitution as it is. We believe that the Constitution is the great protector, of our religious liberty and conscience rights. And when you begin to play with language, when you begin to insert moral relativism and nihilism at a very deep level into everyday idiomatic debate, what you end up with is forcing people to lie and forcing people not to tell the truth. And of course, as Christians, we must never have our consciences bound in that manner.
Well, if you abide in my word, you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free.
Amen.
But that doesn't work really well in a culture that's devoted to lies. And so I think you're exactly right. I think the issue that we're struggling with is, what should we be doing about this? Well, one of the first things we're going to do, and that's why we're here in Washington, is we're going to try to read through these bills. We're going to try to tell you not what the euphemistic title says, because it usually doesn't mean anything like what the title says. It's usually meant to make you emote a certain way and then not want to dig deeper. Well, we're going to dig deeper and say, no, this is what it really does. But it should trouble people. And I think this is where I understand why the secularists are doing this, because they really do believe the church is their enemy. They believe the church must be defeated. Mussolini tried to march on Rome before he, socialized Italy, and he failed. And that's one of the reasons why he didn't become the Hitler of his time. But, for me, I look at these things and say, we're going to tell the truth, but we also believe that our voice is essential in this culture, and our voice is essential for the liberty even of other people, because God, the truth that we're espousing is not our own. It's something that has stood the test of time, and it has blessed people like never before. And I think we're going to commit ourselves to saying, we're going to try to tell you the truth about what these things are. But as the church, we've got to understand we may need to fight to keep our voice public. We've never had to really do that. In pockets we have. But this idea that, this is too political. No, this is just the fundamental truths of fighting for the right to be a public voice in the very culture in which we live. And it would be shocking to me if people would say, that doesn't matter to me. But maybe it's because they didn't really realize we were at this precipice.
I'd like to build on, again, what you just said and put it into a real world scenario that you and I mentioned and discussed briefly just a moment ago. There is a major Supreme Court case this term, right, probably the most important religious liberty case this term, that deals with the question of whether the Catholic Archdiocese of Philadelphia is within its constitutional means that when it is placing a child for orphan care, foster care, or adoption, that even though it may have a contract with the city of Philadelphia, that the Archdiocese of Philadelphia is still within its constitutional right to only place that child into a home with a mother and a father.
Right.
We use this phrase parenting a lot, and parenting is a good phrase. But for those of us who are biblical Christians, there is mothering and there is fathering.
Correct.
And mothers and fathers each play a complementary role to the healthy well-being of a child. Well, the city of Philadelphia does not believe that it is constitutionally permissible to do business with the Archdiocese of Philadelphia if the Archdiocese of Philadelphia wants to exercise its constitutionally protected religious liberty, to place a child in a traditional home. I mean, this is really very sobering.
Well,
please.
Yeah, and think about this. We know. I mean, this is scientifically true, sociologically true, psychologically true. We know that a child does best if it lives in a home with its father and its mother. We know that. That's irrefutable. That doesn't mean that there are other relationships in the world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so if the Catholic Church is devoted to placing children in a father-mother relationship. We know that there's actually tons of evidence out there that that's the best thing we can do. The question is, well, but can other people have children, adopted children too? And we've already said we're not going to limit. If you want to go through another agency, you can actually do that. But for someone then to say, but if you hold that view, even though there's all kinds of evidence to support why it's a good thing, just because you hold that view as unique, we're going to put you out of business. And you just sit there and you start to think about the kind of thinking that has to go into looking at something that we know has benefits that are so unique just because father, mother, child is a physiological reality that cannot be replicated in any other relationship. And we have to deny that just because this person says, well, we happen to believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. We're not even limiting people to go find other ways of adopting. We're just saying, let us be who we are and serve those in our care. And it's just amazing to me. Obergefell was supposed to be so narrow. Remember, it wasn't supposed to impact any of these things. And now we're seeing that was never true.
No, I think that's exactly right. And I think it matters to our larger narrative during this conversation in this way, Greg, that whoever is the president next, it's not just nomination and confirmation of the Supreme Court or appellate judges or district judges. All of that is very important, needless to say. But it is also at the Supreme Court here in Washington, who is your Solicitor General, which is to say, who is the lawyer, the top lawyer representing your administration, representing the American point of view, the American administration's point of view in the Supreme Court. With no exception, over the course of the last 4 years, on every single religious liberty and human life case, with no exceptions, the Solicitor General or the Deputy Solicitor General of the United States has sided with a pro-life, pro-religious liberty viewpoint. Right. That is a fact. And who the Solicitor General is, who the Deputy Solicitor Generals are, this really matters for the shaping of policy with long-lasting implications and for our religious liberty and conscience rights in the country. And this is why I say that personnel is policy, even far beyond the most senior people that many of us would know. There are just thousands and thousands of very central people brought to office because of who the president is and how they maneuver in a worldview sense for the things that we hold most dear.
Well, that's kind of where we are, folks. I mean, like we've been trying to tell you, all these things matter, especially to us as a church, because we want to be faithful to the Word of God, and we want to be faithful to sharing the Word of God in its truth and purity. And God has ordered, and He created and has ordered the world, and that's part of our proclamation. It's what finally calls us ultimately to repentance, to hear the good news and forgiveness in Jesus Christ alone. And when the church itself as an entity is in the crosshairs of the government, we think the government's it's out of control at that point, or it's encroached upon us. So, Tim, thank you for bringing to us kind of the sense of where we are right now. But let's hope that our people really understand how serious this is. It's not just politics we're talking about. We're really talking about how this politics affects our ability to be the church. And so going forward, we're going to be praying about that Senate firewall. We're going to be praying about those judges. But we got to start holding people accountable to the platforms that we're voting on. And we talked about that too. It's personnel, but it's also these platforms. And a lot of people didn't know even what the platforms of the two major parties were this last go round. And that, to me, in an information society like ours is quite a shame. So we're going to be keeping on that. Tim, thanks for being a guest with us today.
It's a real pleasure, a real honor, and a real blessing. And on a personal note, thank you for everything that the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty is doing. It's so important to have a singular voice like yours in the public square advocating for family, marriage, parenting, human life, Greg, and religious liberty.
Yes, indeed. And we will keep doing that. And we're so thankful of your partnership, too, with Focus on the Family.
Thank you.
These things are vital. And ultimately, folks, we're here because we want our voice to be free to proclaim the good news of the gospel. We really do believe this. If you abide in Christ's word, you abide in this word of God, you will know the truth. The truth will set you free. That's something that we don't need the government to defend, but we want to defend our right to be able to say that so that all people might hear who this God is, who loved them, created them, and redeemed them. So again, thank you very much. Till next time, speak the truth in love, be wise as serpents, harmless as doves, and until next time, God richly bless you. Thanks for joining us. Take care.